The meeting had been scheduled as a term sheet review. That was what the calendar invitation said, sent by Victor Ashworth's assistant on a Thursday afternoon for the following Monday at 2. Term sheet review. Meridian Ventures / Okafor Dynamics. Standard language. The kind of meeting that happened 100 times a week in the San Francisco financial district, in glass-walled conference rooms above the bay, between investors and founders who had reached the stage where the money was real and the documents were next. Zara Okafor had built Okafor Dynamics from a patent and a proof of concept into a company that was, by any reasonable valuation, worth somewhere between $60 and $80 million. The patent was hers, a materials processing innovation she had developed during her doctoral research at MIT, licensed exclusively to the company she had founded the year she graduated. The proof of concept had become a product line. The product line had 3 enterprise clients and a pipeline that her projections, reviewed and confirmed by 2 independent analysts, suggested would generate $42 million in revenue over the next 36 months. Victor Ashworth had led the Series A 18 months ago. $8 million for 22% equity, at a valuation that had seemed generous then and looked modest now. He had taken a board seat. He had been, in the 18 months since, a functional board member, available, occasionally useful, connected in ways that had opened 2 of the 3 enterprise client relationships. Zara had trusted him the way founders trusted lead investors when things were going well, provisionally, with the specific vigilance of someone who understood that the relationship would only be tested when things got difficult. Things were not difficult. Things were, by any measurable standard, going very well. Which was why what happened in the Monday meeting was not a response to crisis. It was an attempt to capture value that was being created by someone Victor Ashworth had decided should not be the one capturing it. Zara Okafor was 36 years old, the daughter of a Nigerian aerospace engineer who had come to the United States for his PhD and stayed, and a Ghanaian economist mother who had spent her career studying resource extraction, specifically the mechanisms by which value created in one place was systematically transferred to another. Her mother had published 11 papers on this subject. Zara had grown up watching her read drafts at the kitchen table, marking passages in red, explaining to her daughters over dinner what the patterns meant and where they appeared, and how they were made to seem inevitable when they were, in fact, choices. She had grown up understanding that extraction was not random. It had a grammar. Once you learned the grammar, you could read it anywhere. She had also grown up understanding that building was the answer to extraction, not as philosophy, but as engineering. Her father had spent his career designing systems that worked under conditions where failure was not acceptable, and he had taught her, by watching him work rather than by any explicit instruction, that the thing that protected you from a system failing was knowing the system completely. Every component, every load-bearing element, every place where assumptions had been made instead of tested. She had applied this to the patent that was the foundation of Okafor Dynamics, a materials processing innovation that had emerged from 5 years of doctoral research at MIT, built on a theoretical framework she had developed in her second year, and spent 3 years proving out in the lab. The patent had taken 18 months to prosecute, and covered a method of treating composite materials under temperature gradients that increased structural integrity by a margin that made it relevant to 3 separate industries she had not anticipated when she began the work. She had been meticulous about the IP from the first day, the patent in her name, licensed exclusively to the company under terms that Harriet Osai had reviewed and documented, and that made the ownership chain clear in every direction. She had been meticulous about everything. She had learned, from her mother's work and her father's precision, that careful people built things that lasted, and careless people built things that could be taken. The company had not been easy. 18 months of pre-revenue, the particular grind of building a hardware-adjacent technology business, where the sales cycles were long, and the enterprise clients moved at the speed of procurement committees, and the capital requirements were substantial before the revenue appeared. She had taken the Series A because she needed it, and because the terms were reasonable, and because Victor Ashworth had come with 2 relationships that became 2 of the 3 enterprise clients, and the enterprise clients were the business. She had been reading his grammar for 6 weeks. It had started with small things. A question in a board call about the company's IP ownership structure, casual, framed as housekeeping, the kind of question that was easy to answer and easy to move past. A follow-up email 2 weeks later asking for the original patent licensing agreement between Zara personally and the company. For the investor records, a conversation at a conference where Victor had introduced her to 2 people from a competing materials firm without explaining the connection, which Zara had noted and not addressed directly because she was gathering information, not deploying it. Then, a call from her company's outside counsel, a woman named Harriet Osai, who had received an inquiry from a law firm she didn't recognize asking for a copy of Okafor Dynamics' cap table under a due diligence request for a potential transaction. Harriet had called Zara immediately. The law firm was connected, through 2 intermediaries, to a private equity fund that Victor Ashworth had co-founded 8 years ago, before moving to venture capital. Zara had spent the weekend before the Monday meeting in her home office with Harriet on speakerphone, and 12 years of corporate law in Harriet's head, and the full cap table, and board minutes, and the original Series A documents spread across the desk. They had read everything twice. They had identified what Victor was trying to do. They had, together, spent the weekend making sure it could not be done. The mechanism was elegant in the way that extraction mechanisms tended to be once you understood the grammar. The Series A documents contained a drag-along provision, standard in venture agreements, that allowed investors above a certain ownership threshold to compel a sale under specific conditions. Victor's 22% was below that threshold. But the Series A also contained a dilution mechanism, triggered by a board vote approving a new financing round, that would reduce Zara's equity stake in a way that, if a new investor came in at a specific structure, would bring Victor's percentage to the triggering threshold. The new investor, per the due diligence inquiry Harriet had received, was the private equity fund. The term sheet review on Monday was not a review. It was the meeting where Victor would present the new financing round, call for a board vote, and begin the sequence that ended with Okafor Dynamics compelled into a sale to a buyer he controlled, at a valuation he set, with Zara Okafor holding a stake that the dilution mechanism would have reduced to something she could not prevent. It was, Harriet said, one of the most intricate founder squeeze structures she had seen in 20 years of corporate law. It would have worked, she added, against almost any founder who hadn't spent the weekend reading the documents with their outside counsel. Zara had spent the weekend reading the documents. On Saturday night, after the 4th read-through, she had called her mother. Not for legal advice. Her mother was an economist, not a lawyer, but because she had needed to hear her mother's voice while she held the full picture of what was being attempted. Her mother had listened to the summary without interrupting. She had been quiet for a moment, the silence of a woman running the familiar grammar through a new instance, confirming the translation. Then she said, in the specific tone she used when a phenomenon she had spent her career studying appeared in a personal context, "The grammar is the same. It is always the same. What are you going to do about it?" Zara had told her. Her mother had said, "Good. Make sure the timing is right." Clara Mensah had been introduced to Zara 8 months earlier at a conference in Houston, a Women in Deep Tech event that Zara had almost not attended because she had a product demo that week, and the travel was inconvenient. She had gone anyway because her operations manager had told her she needed to show up in rooms where capital lived, and Clara Mensah's family office was capital that understood what Okafor Dynamics was building. They had talked for 40 minutes at the conference. Clara had said she was interested when the timing was right. Zara had filed that away. She had called Clara on Friday evening, after the call with Harriet, and explained the situation with the directness of someone who had learned that the right investors appreciated specificity. Clara had listened. She had asked 2 questions. The first about the IP ownership structure. The second about the revenue pipeline's third client, the one closest to closing. Zara had answered both. Clara had said, "I'm in. Tell me the terms." The terms were discussed. The terms were agreed. The round was documented. On Sunday night at 11:47 p.m., Harriet filed the Form D. Victor Ashworth did not know any of this when he walked into the Monday meeting. He arrived 3 minutes early, as he always did, because he was a man who understood that arriving slightly early established a particular kind of authority, the authority of someone who was already present when others arrived, who had claimed the room before the meeting began. He had been doing this for 23 years of venture capital, and it had worked for 23 years, and the rhythm of it was muscle memory now. He set his materials on the conference table. He arranged his coffee. He positioned himself at the head of the long side, which was not the seat Zara usually occupied, but which the room's geometry allowed, and which, in the meeting he was planning, would reinforce the dynamics he needed. He had prepared carefully. The 14 slides were the result of 3 weeks of work by his associate, and 1 week of his own refinement, and they were good, accurate, strategic, building toward the destination with the kind of narrative coherence that disguised destination as logic. He had done this before. The founder squeezed through dilution, twice in 23 years, both times cleanly, both times with founders who had not understood what they were signing when they signed the Series A, and who had trusted the framing, because the framing was designed to be trusted. He was good at this the way surgeons are good at procedures they have performed many times, efficiently, without visible effort. With the confidence of someone who knows where the steps lead. He had not encountered a founder who spent the weekend with outside counsel reading the documents before the meeting that was meant to begin the sequence. Zara arrived at 2 o'clock exactly. She had Harriet with her. Victor looked at Harriet. His expression registered the deviation from the expected term sheet reviews, did not typically include outside counsel, and moved through a rapid recalculation that did not produce a visible conclusion before Zara sat down. "I didn't know we'd have legal today," he said. "Harriet is always available for material meetings," Zara said. "She'll be taking notes." He looked at Harriet again. Not hostility. Recalibration, a variable he hadn't planned for, being absorbed into the model, and the model adjusting. He opened his materials and began. The presentation ran 14 slides. It described a market opportunity and a growth trajectory and the capital requirements of the next phase in language that was accurate and strategic and built, underneath the accuracy, toward a specific destination. The new financing round, the dilution structure, the board vote he would call at slide 12. Zara listened to all of it without interrupting. She had read its logic over the weekend and she let it run to its conclusion, because the conclusion was where the board vote was, and the board vote was where she needed to be when she spoke. She listened the way her father had taught her to listen to a system, not for where it claimed to go, but for where the load was actually being carried. At slide 12, Victor said, I'd like to move to a vote on approving the new round structure, Zara said. Before we do that, I'd like to share something with the board. She opened her laptop. She turned it so the screen faced the table. The document on the screen was the SEC Form D filing, timestamped Sunday at 11:47 p.m., documenting the new financing round, the one that had already closed, the one whose equity structure was already on record, the one that had made the trigger conditions Victor needed arithmetically unreachable. She walked them through it in 4 minutes. The new investor. The terms. The ownership structure that resulted. The cap table as it now stood, on record with the SEC, before this meeting had begun. She used the language of documentation rather than accusation, not what you were planning but what the current structure is. The document said everything that needed to be said. She was simply presenting them. Victor Ashworth looked at the screen. He looked at it the way a person looks at something that has reorganized the world they thought they were operating in. The world where the Monday meeting was the beginning of a sequence that ran in one direction and ended in one place. That world was gone. He looked at where it had been. He looked at Zara. She looked back at him with the expression she had worn through 12 slides, not triumphant, not cold, not performing anything. The expression of a woman who had read the grammar and written the response and was now at the meeting that would have been the beginning of the sequence. Except the sequence was over. The vote you're calling, she said, would have no material effect on the company's cap table. The round is closed. The structure is filed. If you'd like to review the documentation, Harriet has the full package. Harriet placed the package on the table. The board meeting continued for 22 more minutes, during which the remaining agenda items were addressed, and the new financing round was formally ratified by the board's own vote, now that its terms were already on record. A vote that was procedurally appropriate and substantively meaningless because the round had not required their approval to close, only their ratification. Victor voted with the others. He had no grounds to vote against it. He had no grounds for anything. The sequence was over, and he was inside its ending. He left the conference room without speaking to Zara. In the elevator bank, Harriet looked at her and said, "The timing was right." "The timing was right," Zara said. She rode back down to the lobby. Outside, the San Francisco afternoon was doing what San Francisco afternoons did in October. Fog on the bay, the specific gray-gold light that came through it. The city going about its business at the speed of a city. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She called her mother. Her mother answered on the second ring. Zara told her what had happened, from the 14 slides to the Form D on the screen to the 22 minutes of board meeting that had followed. Her mother listened without interrupting. When Zara finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of surprise, the silence of a woman who had spent her career documenting how value moved and who was now hearing, from her daughter, a story about what happened when the person who created the value understood the mechanism before the extraction could begin. "He didn't think you had read the documents," her mother said. "No," Zara said. "They never do." "I know, Mama." Another pause. "You built something real," her mother said. "That's the whole story. You built something real, and someone tried to take it. And you had done the work." A pause. That's all it ever is. The board composition changed 3 months later when Victor Ashworth exercised his right to exit his board seat. A right he had under the Series A agreement and which, under the current circumstances, he exercised in silence, without drama, the way powerful men exit situations that have not gone the way they planned. He filed the paperwork on a Friday afternoon. Harriet confirmed the filing to Zara by text at 4:52 p.m., and Zara read the text standing at her kitchen counter with her coffee going cold, and noted it, and moved on. His equity stake remained. He still held 22% of a company that continued to build. The fourth enterprise client closed the following quarter. The research partnership with the University Materials Lab was announced the quarter after that. The patent family extended. The revenue projections, reviewed by the same two independent analysts, were revised upward by 16% based on the pipeline's current state. The company that Victor had tried to acquire through a sequence that Zara had disrupted in a Sunday night filing was, a year later, worth what her work had always said it was worth, which was more than the sequence would have captured for him, which was the final irony of extraction mechanisms. They required the thing to be undervalued at the moment of capture, and things built correctly resisted undervaluation. The secondary transaction came 14 months after the Monday meeting. Clara Mensa facilitated the introduction to the fund that structured it, a growth equity firm that understood materials technology and had been watching Okafor Dynamics for 2 years. The valuation was $94 million. Zara did not take a full exit. She rolled 60% of her proceeds back into the company because she was not finished building. But the transaction established the number, and the number was correct, and the cap table that had been on file since Sunday night at 11:47 p.m. determined what each stakeholder received. Zara made more from the transaction than Victor did, not because she had designed it that way. She had designed it to protect what she had built, not to maximize relative outcome, but because the math of ownership, documented before he had left the room on a Monday afternoon in October, produced those results when the valuation arrived. The grammar of extraction, encountered and answered in the right sequence, did not require intent to reverse. It only required that the documents be filed correctly, and filed first. Her mother called when the transaction closed. She did not ask about the numbers first. She asked about the work, what the next product line looked like, what the university partnership was producing, what Zara was building toward. Zara told her. The next product line, in prototype. 2 new markets opening from the research partnership. A hiring plan that would bring the team to 40 by year's end. Her mother listened. When Zara finished, there was the specific pause that meant her mother was placing this new information in the framework she had spent 30 years building, the framework of how value moved and where it went, and what happened when the people who created it understood the mechanism before the mechanism reached them. "You built something real," her mother said. Not a compliment, a statement of causation. That's the whole story. You built something real, and someone tried to take it. And you had read the documents. I had read the documents, Zara said. I know, her mother said. I raised you to read the documents. A pause. Keep building. Zara kept building. That was the whole story. She had built something real, and someone had tried to take it, and she had filed the paperwork before he left the room, and then she had gone back to building. That was always the whole story.